You all may know this story. Almost every town has one. Usually it starts with a driver taking the back roads late one night. They're driving, it's cold, it's rainy, nothing really of note has happened. Until through the lights on that driver's car, they see a girl on the side of the road. They stop. They ask if she's okay. She's shivering. She says she got lost trying to walk home from the bar. They ask if she needs a ride, and she agrees. They get into their passenger seat, and they start going down those back roads. Now some time has passed. The driver has listened to the instructions of how to get this girl home. The driver offers the girl a jacket. The girl kindly thanks the driver and puts it on. And when the driver gets to the destination the girl has directed them to, suddenly, the girl is nowhere to be seen. The driver stops, looks around, realizes that the girl has taken the driver to a cemetery. Now that's odd. So the driver gets out of the car, walks for a minute, and realizes that jacket they let the girl borrow is placed gently on a tombstone. This story has various different ways of how it's told, but for the most part, it is told around the world. Now, sometimes the driver ends up in a cemetery. Other times, the driver ends up at a house and goes later to find that the family has pictures of this girl, but she had died a long time ago. Other times, the girl is found at the bar and asks for a ride home. Either way, this story is mainly known as the story of the Vanishing Hitchhiker. Most small towns have this story. But why am I telling this story? Well, I'm closing out the season, and I'm trying to connect it to the stories I told in the past. You know how it goes on this channel. I always ask, why do people tell this story? And what's the significance of it? Well, for this story, most folklorists have said that they believe it's told as a way to warn people. As times change, and in the past, as women became more and more empowered and independent, that's when the story became more prominent. See, it's a way of warning, and usually the driver learns later on that the girl and their car died from a car accident. Whether that girl was driving home from the bar and then just swerved off the road, or she was actually walking home in the dark and unfortunately got struck by a car. These reasons vary. But people usually tell this story as a sort of way of warning that listeners don't need to be careful of the vanishing hitchhiker herself, but they need to be careful to not end up like her. Now, how does this connect to the other stories that I've told? Let's see. So far, I've told the story of the weeping woman, vampires, the witch trials, sleep paralysis, and the old hag. And they've all kind of told lessons. Why do we perpetuate these stories? Is it to protect the ones we love, or is it to kind of control the narrative, right? Think back to the witch trials. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is maybe a more mild version of this, but it connects. The witch trials were a way to control women's actions. They were becoming more independent, so they had to act, right? This was a direct response to the changes in society. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is sort of like that on a much smaller scale. Instead of it having real implications in history, like the people who were accused of witchcraft, It just tried to teach young girls to be cautious. But still, it can cause harm. While the witch trials cause direct bodily harm, the Vanishing Hitchhiker stories can cause young people to be more hesitant, more afraid. It's meant to give us fear so that girls might not go out and drive when they're 21 and just now able to drink, right? It tells them to fear certain opportunities sometimes. And it tells others to be careful of young women who might not be as they seem. While sometimes it's not a bad thing to warn young people to be careful when they're old enough to drink and go out to bars, to make sure they have a safe ride home. But it's also a direct response to how society sees these women and their new independence. And then there's how this might connect to the Weeping Woman, right? The Weeping Woman has so many different interpretations. But it was a way to make people afraid of women who were angry or who were having emotional responses originally. Now, again, if you listen to the first episode of The Weeping Woman, you would know that this story has a change or a shift in how it's told, that now it's more of a sympathetic character and a tale about single mothers in the struggles. But still, there are certain ways, certainly in recent media, that tell it a little different, that tell it in the way that it used to be told, a way to shame women for having justified stress and trauma. And The Vanishing Hitchhiker connects to this in a similar way, where it's meant to cause stress, to cause trauma. Again, on a much lower scale. I think a lot of us tell the story of The Vanishing Hitchhiker, in an innocent way as a ghost story they once heard about their hometown. Like I said before, almost every hometown has this story. But still, it has an underlying purpose of trying to control women's bodies, trying to tell them not to do something because it might go even just a little bit outside of societal norms. And then, like I said, this also connects to our story about sleep paralysis, right? It's not so much in the experience itself. Because as I said before in that episode 3 on sleep paralysis, that this was a means, or that sleep paralysis was the means to understand an experience that was otherwise unexplainable. You can take this idea from sleep paralysis and from the old hag, from the nightmare, from the Mara, whatever you want to call it, and you can apply that to the Vanishing Hitchhiker. But you can apply it in a different way. See, there's an article by a folklorist about a region in India that started to have more and more instances of people saying, oh, they saw the Vanishing Hitchhiker, oh, they experienced this. In that same time, more and more women were driving on their own. There was a record number of more women being independent, getting their driver's licenses, and being on the road. So how do you explain this experience as a society that is looking at a shift in social norms? Some people really push back on these shifts in social norms. People push back on gender equality, on equality of any kind. So to describe it, they create a ghost story, one that both helps them understand what might be happening, helps them contextualize the fact that more women are driving, but they're also creating a sort of monster with it, a scary figure that can come and go in somebody's moving car as she pleases. Now, while The Vanishing Hitchhiker is probably the least violent of the stories I've told so far, it still can be terrifying, right? You're offering your car to a stranger. You're then responsible for getting this girl home, and you ultimately fail at the end. So, to make sense of this shift in social norms, to make sense of the trend of women driving more, of having more independence, they created the story. Much like the sleep paralysis experience, they created something that's meant to scare you, a female entity that's obviously otherworldly, and obviously something that you cannot control, and that's how they learn to cope. Now, when I say The Vanishing Hitchhiker connects to all the stories I have told before, I feel like the stories on vampires that I told is the one that has the loosest connection. But that's only dependent on how you tell the story. See, I told one version of the story, but there are other stories reported of the girl being picked up at the bar. She's new to town. Maybe the person who's picking the girl up is a regular to this bar. There's something about her that is magnetic. That person is drawn to this girl. The person then tries to take the girl home. And as that person is driving, again, of course, the girl vanishes, only leaving her jacket behind for the driver to figure out what happened to her. So while most stories aren't told this way, there is still a trend of this version being told, especially in the US. And it kind of plays on that allure, on us acting on our desires. While, again, it's a societal norm to maybe not take a stranger home, especially a young girl, in a bar, there's consequences, right? Again, like I said, the driver was responsible for this girl. The person at the bar taking the girl home is trying and failing to get the girl from point A to point B. And like vampires, when we used to tell the stories of vampires, which is vastly different today, as I said in the vampire episode, it often implied that it was shameful and dangerous to follow our questions on sexuality, to follow our desires, to follow the things that we want to do, right? And that would lead to the downfall, usually, of women. In this case, in the Vanishing Hitchhiker's case, the woman has already had her downfall. She's already been dead for God knows how long. But still, there's consequences. Well, the Vanishing Hitchhiker, before she even became the Vanishing Hitchhiker, has already experienced these consequences. It still leaves the other party in these stories, the living party, to be terrified and confused. So there's still consequences. All of this to say that the stories we tell have impact and implications. The stories we tell both shape the world and contribute to how we ourselves currently see the world. The Vanishing Hitchhiker tells us to warn young women not to drive. The Vanishing Hitchhiker tells us to put fear in young women that if they're more independent, they might be cursed to haunt a road forever. The nightmare tells us that when we experience things we don't have an explanation for, it is something out of our control and it will just keep happening. And maybe it's because of our suspicious neighbor next door, who happens to be a woman who doesn't quite follow the norms. The witch trials told us that back in history, there was actually a time when women broke a norm and then they were killed for it, in the hundreds. And vampires tell us that if we want to follow our sexual exploration, our gender exploration, we could end up somebody's lunch. And then finally, the Weeping Woman tells us that if women have big emotions, they can become monsters. But again, I want to really emphasize that is just one reading of them. Instead, maybe we can look at all of these monstrous things a little bit differently. Maybe we can see that the weeping woman is just a mother struggling who made a hard choice, but deemed it to be the best choice in a bad situation. Maybe vampires represent a liberation of gender expression and sexuality that the rest of society just isn't prepared to accept yet. Maybe the people who suffered in the witch trials were just innocent human beings living their lives and got caught up in a weird religious power struggle. Maybe the old hag, the sleep paralysis monster, is just a poor way to excuse bad sleeping habits. And when we can't understand those, we unfortunately have to blame a person we don't like. And maybe The Vanishing Hitchhiker isn't just a story to scare young women out of enjoying their lives. Maybe it can be positioned as a story of people can be decent and help other people, even if that other person unfortunately didn't get the help she needed when she was alive. I don't know. I wonder what you guys think of all of this, of the stories that I have told so far. Is there any story that you connect with more now that we've looked at different ways of repositioning these once considered monstrous bodies? Can you see a way in which the Vanishing Hitchhiker, the ghostly girl that comes into your car and disappears before you can even get to your destination, can be something other than a scary entity? I don't know the answer to that, but I would love to hear yours.